All right, let's go to the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champs. They're back-to-back champs and going for the first three-peat in NFL history. Because the Chiefs won, sometimes you forget just how uncomfortable it was last year watching this team, thinking, oh, this is the worst. It's the worst team of the Patrick Mahomes era. When I think the reality was it was the worst offense of the Patrick Mahomes era, but probably the best defense of the era.
Yeah.
From start to finish, that defense won games for them, kept them in every single game, and gave them an opportunity, including all the way through the playoffs. But this offense had some struggles, especially relative to expectations, and they spent this offseason saying, hey, we couldn't throw the ball down the field last year. Mahomes had the second worst passer rating on 20-plus yard throws of any QB in the NFL last year. We're getting faster again. We're getting Marquise Brown in here. We're getting Xavier Worthy, the fastest player in combine history. We're getting him in here in the first round. We're going to start creating explosive plays again. So the Super Bowl champs, the Chiefs, have the pieces in place to maybe be even better than they were last year.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very different team last year than the Chiefs have normally been. We associate them as this high-powered, dominant offense, and the defense has been just good enough and creative enough in key games. Spagnuolo drawing up great game plans, it's enough, right? Last year, actually, the defense was fantastic consistently, and the offense really wasn't for the majority of it. Now, the offense did turn a corner in the playoffs, whether that was by design, they just sort of flipped the switch, or it's just the way it broke down. But like Travis Kelce became Travis Kelce again in the playoffs. Is that something that he's able to do now? You know, Patrick Mahomes has actually been able to consistently elevate his game in the postseason. Playoff Mahomes is even better than regular season Mahomes, who himself looks like the best quarterback maybe of all time if he lasts long enough. Like, this is maybe something that this team is able to do now, is to just get through the regular season, right? Let's just get to the dance, and then as soon as they get there, it's a different team, right? These guys have done it for long enough. They've been there. They've got the experience and they know what's required. Maybe they are simply capable of raising their game in the playoffs. But you're right. Like the approach of Kansas City over the last few years now has been fascinating. When they get exposed by a weakness, they go like all out the following season to fix it, right? Remember that Super Bowl game against Tom Brady and the Bucks? The offensive line was left in ribbons at that point. They were like, oh, that's not happening again. We're going to go hard on the offensive line, completely rebuild the unit. Never again will Patrick Mahomes be running for his life in a game. And then last year, it's like, we don't have any wide receivers. We're relying on this young rookie slot guy. Travis Kelce's not really doing it the same. Never again. We're going to go get the fastest guy that's ever come out of the combine. We're going to get Marquise Brown. Like, we're going to add the weaponry and make sure that that doesn't happen again. So it is kind of interesting the way they identify these weaknesses and really hammer them.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, I think that gives the offense more firepower. You know, we'll talk best and worst case scenario. Of course, the best case scenario is going to be, hey, they win another Super Bowl, no matter what it looks like. You know, they're going to be in the mix. They've been in the AFC
Three-peat.
Championship. Yeah, they've been in the AFC Championship every year. Patrick Mahomes has been a starter. Part of the worst case scenario, though, involves the Kelce thing, right? At some point, he gets older, right? And Mahomes and the Chiefs have, you know, they showed that they can survive without Tyreek Hill, because that was a bit of a question. You know, what happens? How do they evolve? Well, they did. They went more short area, short passing game, underneath stuff. Can they survive without Travis Kelce? At some point, they're going to have to answer that question. So when does that show up? The other piece offensively to keep an eye on is the tackle situation. I think interior, maybe the best guard center combos in the NFL, with Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, left to right. Tackle, though, Jawan Taylor had his struggles last year, not only with the new, are you jumping the snap rule or emphasis, generally just, not as good as what they've had at right tackle in previous years, despite some of the hype. And they moved on from Donovan Smith, who was just a one-year stopgap. They go second rounder Kingsley Suamataia, moving him from right to left tackle. He's had good returns so far during the preseason, but they're putting, the left tackle spot into the hands of a rookie. That's one of the question marks I'm looking at here between Taylor and Suamataia. Will they hold up enough? Or, because that also coincided with some of the struggles they had last year, was, some pass protection issues.
Yeah, and I've kind of been working on the basis all offseason that at some point they would sign this year's version of Donovan Smith, which maybe would be Donovan Smith again. But
Right.
a Donovan Smith or David Bakhtiari or somebody, one of these veteran stopgap left tackle solutions to again just make sure that that position is okay and that they're not, Mahomes isn't running for his life and they don't have a turnstile at a specific spot. But it does sound, and again, this is a time of recording, maybe something will have happened by then, but it does sort of seem like they're going to give Kingsley Suamataia a shot at having that spot all the way through the season as a rookie, non-first round or non, top end pick, offensive tackle to go out there and get that done, which is maybe a departure from like that would be the first sort of risk, I guess, that they've taken on the offensive line since, saying never again that group. That would
Yeah.
be a different dynamic this year.
The other element that I think makes the Chiefs so difficult is, a guy like Isaiah Pacheco coming out of the backfield with his hard-nosed running style and the fact that a defense has to now account for Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce as underneath after the catch options, the speed of Xavier Worthy and Marquise Brown once Marquise Brown's healthy, and then Pacheco trying to run them over, right? So, I mean, you have to have physical players to handle Pacheco, speed to handle their receivers, good tacklers, good space players to handle the underneath passing attack. And oh, by the way, Mahomes running the show, who's almost impossible to sack, can win within the pocket, of course, can win outside the pocket. So you need to be able to play contain, and you want to put pressure on him. Don't want him to break the pocket. It just puts so much stress on the defense. And I think the Chiefs now will be able to stress defenses in different ways this year. First time probably since 2021. Yeah, in all of these ways. So again, I think the Chiefs offense has a chance to be even more dangerous now than they were probably the last year or two. Defensively, a little bit of turnover there with L'Jarius Sneed, the biggest loss there. Spags running that defense, Sam. Such a good job, third down, confusing quarterbacks, blitzing when they need to, relying on Chris Jones to move around and create pressure. But a lot of it was the physical man coverage that L'Jarius Sneed was able to play. The other long corners, Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, and then Trent McDuffie, who was able to move from the slot, move in and out. But you lose Sneed as that number one corner, and it's probably just, the biggest thing to keep an eye on the defensive side of the ball this year.
Yeah, it's definitely a big blow to that defense, I think. They were in this position this offseason where they had a couple of these guys that wanted to get paid. They kept Chris Jones. Sneed was the sacrifice, the guy they let walk because of it, or the guy they let go because of it. McDuffie, I think, insulates them from that. He can step in and become L'Jarius Sneed effectively, both in terms of being a really good player, in terms of being good against run and pass, also being able to play inside and outside. He can do everything that they need him to do, but it does have a knock-on effect. They could have had Sneed and McDuffie, and now they only have McDuffie having to step up and become that number one guy for them. So it is a potential blow to that defense and an area that they're maybe weaker than they were a year ago. They're also, Charles Omenihu injured late again. He's working his way back from another injury. Is he going to be the same force for them? It's just there are some question marks now to this defense that was so good a year ago.
How good is Chris Jones at this point? Aaron Donald always felt like he was in a different league when it came to just consistency, pass rush dominance, run game dominance. Is Chris Jones now the gold standard at defensive tackle?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he was the guy that had gotten closest to Aaron Donald, over the last few years. And maybe nobody is Aaron Donald. Nobody could kind of put themselves in that category. But I always describe it as, Donald used to exist in his own little anomalous data point. If you pull up a graph, right? There'd be like the league and this big mess, and then Aaron Donald out here by himself. Chris Jones was bridging the gap between the NFL and Aaron Donald. Like that, he never quite got there, but he was splitting the difference. He was getting closer to Aaron Donald than anybody else. But the other thing is, they've given Chris Jones a ton of money now. Aaron Donald just retired. Chris Jones is the next draft class or the second one after Donald, 2 draft classes after. Like he's 30 years old. He's not, he's not young anymore. And who knows, I'm sure he's got years left of playing at a high level, but how many years left does he have playing at the level that he's been at? Does that decline start to happen, or has he got plenty of years left being an absolutely dominant force?
I like how they constructed their defensive line last year. Different body types and styles, including Amenahu, who you mentioned, with his length, and Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who they got in the first round. I think they need more production out of him. He's got that burst and bends to get around the edge. George Karlaftis as a power rusher. And then Jones, who, in our weekly previews this year with Check the Mic, will always highlight when there's a weakness at tackle, the Chiefs go and exploit that. And they exploit it at the most opportune time of the game. Like, oh, it's 3rd and 10, Super Bowl's on the line. Chris Jones is going to beat your right tackle and, sack Joe Burrow or whatever it might be. It's always at the right time. So I think the Chiefs have some really fun options for mixing and matching up front with that defensive line, with the way they've built it with just multi-gap, different body types up front. Best case scenario, we already mentioned. Yeah, if they win another Super Bowl, it's a three-peat. Worst case scenario for the Chiefs, what could go wrong this year to keep them from the Super Bowl, or even somehow keep them out of the AFC Championship for the first time in the Mahomes era?
That's a fascinating question. Like, how bad could it actually get for Kansas City? Like, is there floor AFC Championship game? Like, is that how insane this team is?
Well, here's the thing, right? The analyst in me says you can't just play better when you want to, right? That you don't just, trudge through the regular season. Remember let's remember last season. They were turning the ball over like crazy, dropping passes. Kadarius Toney's lining up offside to negate one of the coolest plays of all time, which would have been a game-winning lateral play. I mean, everything was going wrong. And then it was like in the playoffs, they were just like, no mistakes. We're not going to turn it. There was like one bad turnover at the goal line against Buffalo. We're just not going to make mistakes. We're not going to drop passes. We're not going to fumble anymore. Mahomes is going to take care of the ball, and the defense is going to make all these third down stops. Can you just turn it on again? So that's one thing that could go wrong. You just can't turn it on. And some of those mistakes, honestly, that have showed up throughout the Andy Reid era. You just have some games where it's like, it's just the Chiefs beating the Chiefs. That could happen in the playoffs at the wrong time at any given point. But the Chiefs have shown they know how to do a good job and take care of the ball. I mean, the other aspect of it is general defensive regression. They didn't give up more than 27 points in one game last season, consistent from start to finish. No other team had ever done that. Just a little regression defensively. And then, offensively, does the offensive line become an issue? Mahomes didn't have his best supporting cast. He didn't actually have his best season last year. Do you just get, slightly below elite Mahomes, and that's just not enough in any given year?
I mean, I feel like they actually might be able to turn it on in the postseason at will at this stage. Like, I think they have enough experience and they understand the difference that this team might actually be able to just sort of muddle their way through a regular season and then go, okay, now it's real. There's no second chances anymore. Here, it's go time, right? I think that might actually be a characteristic of Mahomes and Kelsey and those guys at this point. But I think that their worst case scenario, they still make the playoffs comfortably. Their worst case scenario is in the divisional round, they meet Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, and one of those guys has an elite game. I mean, Josh Allen, was 13 seconds away from knocking them off before, right? Joe Burrow has beaten them multiple times before. That's their worst case scenario, is whatever the way the seeding works, they end up running into a team like Cincinnati, like Buffalo, who might not be as good as them over 17 games, over 20 games, but one time in January in the division round just has a good game and knocks them off.
That's the one other piece to think about, even what you just mentioned. Sometimes when the team wins, you're like, well, they won. Of course, everything went right that entire season. But we're talking literally a handful of plays over the last two seasons, right? I mean, the Chiefs they won in overtime against the Niners. They're 1 3rd and 4 batted pass away from losing the Super Bowl to the Niners. They're 1 or 2 plays away from losing to the Eagles the previous season, or even in the AFC Championship against the Bengals, right? So do those 1 or 2 plays consistently go the way of the Chiefs? Seemingly, they're making those plays and the other teams are not over the last few years. But in any given year, those plays could go the other way at some point. And yeah, you might get a divisional round loss or an AFC Championship loss. But I think the Chiefs are still well positioned. I expect them to be in the AFC Championship and beyond. But the worst case is just, hey, a few of those plays don't go the other way. And the real worst case is you start to see more aging from Kelsey. You start to see maybe, some of those core pieces not looking as good. I would look at Jones and Kelsey. If they started aging and losing a step or losing something, that's the only real reason for concern, I think, if you're a Chiefs fan this year.
Kelsey is definitely one to sort of monitor. Like, okay, he turned it on the postseason, and maybe he's able to do that now. But he's definitely old at this point. Like I always use this stat: he's 10 months younger than Rob Gronkowski. Right? Gronk has been out of the game now for a couple of years. He's been retired twice. Like Kelsey is that old. He should be slowing down, and so eventually, maybe that's where it first starts. It's going to be the regular season slow down, and then postseason he's able to pull it back together for a few games. But if that was the start of Kelsey's decline, it's unlikely to slow down its rate. Like it's only going to be a bigger thing year on year.
Key position group or player for you for the Chiefs this year? Is it left
I
tackle?
mean, yeah, like if they are planning on going into the season with Sua Mataia at left tackle, it's definitely left tackle. Even if they don't, even if they bring in a veteran, I think that's still the kind of most important position for them up front. Otherwise, it would be, I think, that cornerback spot now that Snead is out of there, now that everybody sort of has to step one spot up the depth chart. Does that group play the same as they did a year ago?
It was the two positions I was going to highlight, and I just want to give a shout out to Trent McDuffie, who I thought was so good last year. Played in the slot, played outside, had the key pass breakup at the end zone in the Super Bowl. I think it's his opportunity to maybe, get recognized as a potential star this year as L'Jarius Sneed moves on. But you got to keep an eye on just they're just down a peg as far as depth goes at corner, and if that hurts their ability to remain as consistent as they were last year on that side of the ball.